Mike's on Mike is taking another week off during the holidays. During the week of January 1st through the 5th, we'll be rerunning the podcast we did with Adam Chaskin, who's the CEO of the Jewish Community Alliance, and Eric Mann, who's CEO and president of the First Coast YMCA, as they talk about putting together an organization called Together Against Hate, which is a speaker series which addresses prejudice, bigotry, and hatred here in the Jacksonville community. We hope you enjoyed the podcast once again, and we also hope that you have a very happy new year.
Welcome to Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville. Join 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome once again to another episode of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller. With me in studio once again is Mike Hightower, and still baling hay out at the horse farm outside of Jacksonville is our friend Mike Tolbert.
He is slow and inefficient still.
Yeah, we'll get him in here one of these days. We'll get him in here one of these days. We have a special day today. We really feel that way. This, for the first time, Mike's on Mike actually has two guests at the same time, and there's a good reason for it. Adam Chaskin is the CEO of the Jewish Community Alliance, better known to all of us as the JCA. Eric Mann is CEO and president of the First Coast, and I'll just do the letters on that one, Eric, YMCA. But importantly, these two leaders have set out on a mission, a very important one, to deal with hate and racism that we have in the city, which is not only prevalent here, but it's prevalent across the country. We don't want to single out Jacksonville as the only place where we've seen this type of activity. It's happening all over. But we're going to be addressing what's being done here in Jacksonville. Adam and Eric, welcome to Mike's on Mike. Nice to have you here.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Tell us about, again, Together Against Hate, how it got started. What is your mission?
Well, it got started by a relationship that Adam and I built when he came into town. He had a relationship with the Y CEO in Albany. I knew that person, and over the time, we kept in touch, and we try to help each other if we can from an organizational standpoint. And it was at the vigil downtown after that. I was there, he was there. We saw each other across the park and just came over and started talking about, what could we do as organizations?
What vigil was that?
It was after
What vigil was that?
At the Dollar General?
No. This
before
was
that.
This was what, 2 years ago?
No, it's about a year ago. It was the Florida Georgia game.
Florida Georgia game.
The Florida Georgia game.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the anti-Semitic messages that were displayed in the stadium and downtown buildings.
Right.
Yeah. So it was that vigil there, and we just started talking about, and I talked about, the why we had started a civility campaign, because after COVID ended and during COVID, it was just, and so one thing led to another, and then Adam and I got smart and we invited our team, and they really created this opportunity because, and I'm half joking, but our first thought was to have something in February around this Heart Month, around basically fight against hate, 5K. That's really how it started, and then the team got together, and we got smart people that we work with, and they created something that was even more impactful, and that's how the series got started, and so we're here today to talk a little bit more about that.
Good.
It's been a year ago. So we, as you both have mentioned, what caused the situation, which before you all got here last week, Mike and I, the three Mikes got together, and I was the one that said, after talking with Nat Glover, God, I thought we could do better, and I thought we'd come so far or come farther. And then they basically, because I'm in and out of town, when I heard the three incidences in a one weekend, which is appalling, it is, every part of it is disgusting. Having now understood that it was one weekend and the breadth of it, of how when we're hosting thousands of people plus our own community, to the two of you, and thank you for one being here, and thank you for coming together and standing tall on this. The question I have is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are we in your mind on those two terrible words of anti-Semitism and racism? it's obviously it's big, but from your perspective, individually, having been here, witnessed it, I think people like myself who thought we'd come a long way, maybe we're not seeing it. So how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you see it? Honest Injun.
I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I don't see us very long along that path. I think we have a long way to go.
So you would say, if we're talking on a scale of 1 to 10, we're closer to 10.
I'm saying if 10 is we've accomplished all our goals.
I was thinking the other way.
Okay. So if 10 is we've accomplished our goals, I think we're around a 2-3, to be quite honest with you. I think there's the obvious things, whether it's the displays that happen on the buildings, whether it's the horrible hate crime or the people were killed at Dollar General. Those are what a lot of people focus on, but it's the not as obvious stuff that different groups of people live with every day, the innuendos and the other things that happen, the built-in things that in our society that systemically are causing different groups to be suppressed, not be able to achieve as much.
Yeah.
Because of all those things, I unfortunately can't give a very high score.
Eric?
It's not an easy question, right? It's
not an easy question for me to ask.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've realized. I've lived in 7 different cities around the country in my 42-year career in the Y. And so here in Jacksonville, I've been here 12 years, and it's in communities, it's the subtleness. Recently, I would say it seems like Jacksonville is like fertile ground for whether it's Jacksonville or Florida as a state. And so don't know, what's causing it, but it seems like it's happening more and more. I would give it, people are more interested now in at least listening, which is a big step, I think, for the community, which that's the first step to actually understanding, is being willing to. And so I think people are tired of the murders, are tired of that's going on in our community. I have a YMCA off of San Jose. We have a picture of Christ on one wall, Christmas, and we have a menorah right there. And so, because we welcome all, we have members from all communities. I get letters about why I have a menorah in a YMCA every year, pretty much every Christmas. I'll get a letter. So I think that a lot of it's people don't know better and are not interested in understanding better. So, but now I would say that the community has a thirst for at least being open to listening and understanding.
Tolbert?
Yeah, and Hightower mentioned the big events, and you spoke to part of what my question was going to be. I think in my mind, those big events was like the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much that goes on a daily basis underneath that we don't get to see. Thank God, don't know about, but that many, many other people do and are affected by. And I'm curious as to how you penetrate beneath the iceberg, the bottom of the iceberg, to get to those people and help them and try to break out of this system.
Well, that's kind of the point of what we've put together here with this series. It's my and I believe both our organizations' belief that a lot of this prejudice and hate comes from a lack of experience and lack of education. You grow up in a particular area, you're never exposed to a certain race, a certain religion, you're naturally hesitant the first time that you encounter it, you hear something negative, you've never had any experience, you have no reason to maybe doubt that comment. And so it's breaking down those barriers, which is why this partnership, I think, is so wonderful, because the reality is the JCA is one location. The Y is fortunate to have many locations around town. And then you bring in the other partners that have agreed to be part of this, that we're able to move this education. And that's what it is. It's a series of educational sessions each focusing on a different form of hate and bigotry. We're able to move it around town to geographically, hopefully, allow more people the opportunity. We recognize that a lot of times the people who come to these type of events are already, in your corner. You don't get a lot of the people, but if we get one person who, for whatever reason, happens to hear the message, whether they come intentionally or they unintentionally are part of the program, and we change one person's mind, we open up one person's mind to realize that maybe what they heard X number of years ago might not actually be true, then it's a successful thing that we did here in putting this together. Unfortunately, we're not going to solve the issues in this 6-month program, and it's something that I know we hope to repeat and continue to move around to different parts of Jacksonville and continue to focus on the different forms of hate bigotry that are out there.
I just want to follow up. You said, I hope we're not preaching to the choir. And the list of nonprofits that you have at the table is really significant. I mean, those are some really great organizations. But how do you not preach to the choir and get people from the problem is, how do you get them in the room and sitting at the table with you? How do you make that happen? And if you can't do that, how do you change their minds? If this is about changing minds more than in behavior, how do you do that without the connection?
Well, part of it is accessibility and making people aware that this is happening. You can come to one of our series, and there has to be some intentionality from their part in wanting to do it. But you're talking about two organizations that in a lot of ways are safe spaces, and two organizations, to some people, are surprised that we're doing something together. There's a lot of people who probably look at it. So part of this is it's symbolic and it's real, but it's a symbolic coming together as well as organizations that there are people who would say, oh, that's different, which it's really not, but they don't know any difference. Then talking about how we can make change, and Adam is exactly right. It's really one person at a time. And I talk a lot about, when we talk about racism, I always say, well, what happens when you go home? What happens when you go home and your neighbor or your brother or your mother or your cousin, they say something that's racist? What do? Do you say, no, that's not right? Da-da-da-da-da-da. Or do you basically encourage it? Or in a lot of ways, you encourage it by not doing anything.
Become complicit by your silence.
By your silence. And so what we want is we want to change one person at a time, that when they do go home and they hear it or they see it, they step up and they say, that's not right. We can do better, da-da-da. And more people that do that, that's how we will change this. Because it happens not when we're at work, because everybody's going to say the right thing, they're going to do it. But when you go home, how do you live?
This is really coming out of left field. And it's nothing that we discussed, by the way, guys, before this meeting. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence ahead of time. We have sentenced people to imprisonment because of activities that were associated with anti-race or anti-Semitism. Do we have any kind of program in place where if you're an inmate who's just sitting in jail because of the conviction that you just had, where there's somebody that comes in and actually talks to them and say, so where did all of this come from? Where did this come from? I mean, is this something, were your parents this way? Where did you learn it? Was this something you got in school? Was it something with a club that you belonged to, or a gang in some cases? Where did this all stem from? And really start to dig deep with that individual you're talking about, Eric, in order to have them see for themselves exactly where this source of that hatred came from, and maybe a light bulb goes out.
can't directly answer your question because I'm not familiar with what the penal system has for that. But I can tell you, actually, this morning I was at a meeting with local law enforcement where they were focusing on these hateful messages that mostly are through social media, but otherwise, and children. And we're talking about minors that are starting to, they have been following these, whether they're websites or, social media posts. And exactly what you were saying is, a combination of the schools, the parents, the children, of sitting down and trying to figure out exactly where it's coming from. And from their perspective, looking at that as another channel to hopefully shut down.
Let me follow up on that because my two colleagues weren't there. I was at the Jewish Family and Community Services panel discussion that you did last week, I guess it was now. That letter that was written by that mother about her child participating in something in school. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Do you remember that one, Adam?
Certainly. It was a Holocaust education program, right. And by the rules.
Listen to this, guys. This was really eye-opening for me.
So by the rules of the school system, where the Holocaust survivor was going to speak, the parents were notified ahead of time, and basically a permission slip was sent home for the kids to participate in this program. And one mother, and the letter was read at the program that you're speaking of, denied her child, access to the program, and then didn't just do that, went on to denounce that the Holocaust even happened, that it was a propaganda, and went on and on with some hateful words. And that was obvious from the letter. It wasn't something she just created that day. It's something that she's been taught and was raised with that belief. And she's the type of person that we would hope to get in the room. But I want to circle back to the previous question of how do we get to those people so we're not just preaching to the choir.
Yep.
And you're part of the solution. It's the media. Eric and I can hope that people come to the programs that our staff has done an incredible job designing, but it's the people that are outside of our sphere sometimes that are actually making a huge impact. So whether it's this podcast, it's other media that have been fortunate that have covered it, and that's where those people who, quote unquote, are not in the choir are hopefully hearing the messages.
My political side's going to come out, and I'm sitting here with my stepbrother Talbert. But when you say that, I'm reminded of some of the things that Mike Tolbert has worked with us on some other issues. But it's about community engagement through messaging. And the one that jumps out at me that Mike was very much a part of and has been successful, but I think of when this community went through the HRO. The first strategy failed because they tried to make it a win-lose until a lot of the people that are now part of your coalition, we got together and we brought it to the whole community. And we, in essence, if you remember, we forced a public dialogue, a debate, and we had buses on both sides that went to those meetings. And that's what really got the council to change. I'm suggesting that a lot of the people that we see who are supporting this is not only social media, but, and Mike can talk to this better because he's good at it, but because I can help raise the money, but I think we've got to take it out there. I get what you're doing, and I get with the podcast. Now there's 8 of us in this room, plus Talbert. We're at least at 13 people who are listeners to us. Or maybe 14 if my wife does tonight, if I force her or promise her something. But seriously, I think we've got to take this message and make sure that it becomes a priority. Social media, if that's not one of them. I mean, we are in a situation of what I would call community understanding. We had Lori Boyer, not to belabor it, we had Lori Boyer that came over here last week and was telling us about all the things that she's doing. None of us knew because the media is looking for something sexy and they got to do it in 15 seconds. The Times Union newsroom is down to 5 people. I think we're going to have to beat them at their own game, and it's got to be social media. It's got coalition building. And I think to your point, not only this podcast, but when you look at some of the folks that are helping with that, those are the same people who helped organized and pushed HRO when a lot of people, believe it or not, in this community didn't even understand what HRO was. So I throw that out to that. But when you get into messaging and how you do that, Dr. Tolbert can help you with that.
Thank you for volunteering me. Do you have
It'll get you out of the
do you have a digital media
barn.
presence?
Yes, we do.
Do you guys have a digital media presence program?
We do. Our organizations have it, and both of our organizations are very engaged, not only with this, but if you notice what happened after the shooting, and I think it was just announced that there's $1 million being raised.
Yeah.
Well, back to how do we get this to the people? It's going to take the business community. You saw all the signatures on the letter that came out. And that I'm involved with the Civic Council. So what you're going to see is, I hope, is a continuation, not episodic, but a continuation of getting at this ground roots of getting that message out as a community, not as just one of the two organizations, or not just, but the entire community, including the business community, the regional community, and now you're going to have some resources that can go directly to getting that message out. Because part of it, again, this is just Eric's belief, is the more we stay with it and not let this flame go out, the bigger difference we're going to make, and more people listen. If you know about PR, they say the message, you have to beat them over the head till you're obnoxious with it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what we want to continue to be. We want to be obnoxious with the message, access, having it out there as part of our community. Because here's the fear. So we had the Kansas City Chiefs here, right, a couple of weeks ago.
Unfortunately.
I woke up in the middle of the night saying, man, I hope there's not one of those planes come across. Mm-hmm. Think about that. That's what I'm thinking about is, man, I hope there's no plane that has any. That's what I mean by our community being fertile for this whole kind of attitude. Obviously, it didn't. I was happy for it, but the fact that I was thinking that way, that we got to get past that. We can't expect the worst out of our community.
Yeah, that's a little bit about in politics. You're hoping it doesn't happen, but as Talbert has explained to us a lot of times, hope is not a strategy. I want to go back to those 3 incidents that weekend. Now, I wasn't here, so I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, okay? So I'm doing this 472 miles away where I was. I really did not understand the significance of it because I wasn't here, but as I'm learning it. At that point, why I think where I think drives this coalition you're putting together is part of that message is we can't ever have that happen. And if it does, we're going to use every means within this community to find out who did it, why we did it. We're going to ID them, and we're going to publicly find out and make them say why you're going to do it. Mike can probably do it artfully a lot better than I am. But to me, I'm reminded of the scene out of Network. It's one of those things. Somebody's got to screen out the window. I'm mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore. If the two things, something like it, if it would bring a community to its knees, and I'm the one that had the discussion with my 2 colleagues, thinking things were a little bit more rosy. I'm really to the other part is, damn, if that's what's going on, then damn it, we've got to get together and make sure that whoever does it, we out them and we shame the hell out of them. Because my question was, how does somebody get to this point of being that hateful? I don't know how you pull that much hate out of someone, but I do think what we've got to do is create an environment that if you go there will be a price to be paid. Now, maybe that's not the right approach, but to me, it's wrong on every level, and maybe we can turn them, but they got to know is that it's a minority, and there will be consequences when they do that, because it hurt. Can
I bring it back to the home?
No, go ahead.
Can I bring it back to the home for you?
Yeah. Yes.
Again, the everyday incidences. I grew up in a small southern town in Alabama in the 50s. So I know an awful lot about segregation in the segregated South and what was going on back then. I was fortunate that I grew up in a household that didn't participate in any of the nonsense going on. In fact, I never even thought about it. But I was surrounded by people, other adults and their children, who thought differently than my parents did or differently from how I grew up. And I'm convinced, and I heard it so much, there was so many, you hear things so often that at least it clouds your mind. You may not believe some of the things you hear, like black folks have smaller brains. I mean, that was one of the things we heard we were taught as children growing up. Well, you don't believe that. In your mind, you said, that doesn't make sense. But you don't know any better. And I guess my point is, how in God's name, and you probably don't have the answer to this, I'm sure you don't, but how do you penetrate those households? How do you penetrate those children so that they don't grow up with that stuff? They don't adopt those ideas, even if they have the doubts, but they end up swallowing the bait. What do you do?
Well, you're right. I don't have the answer.
I didn't mean to stump you.
but it does start with the children, and I'll give you a real quick story. There was the hateful incident that happened with the displays on the CSX building downtown, and there was a press conference afterwards that I was at, and I'm speaking with a reporter who he and his family, African Americans, they're not Jewish. However, they chose to send their child to the JCA's preschool. Child's now in elementary school. And we're just talking afterwards. And he says, you wouldn't believe the stuff that is said to my child in school. And he just looks at them and says, I know you're wrong. I went to the JCA preschool, and that's not true. And so his parents obviously made a conscious decision to choose to send him to ours. So his parents are, I mean, I do know them, so I can say this pretty firmly, but obviously had a little more open mind than maybe some of the people you're referring to in your question to even allow their child to come to a preschool inside a Jewish organization. But that child now has a different understanding of what his peers did not have the similar experience. And so by him telling his peers that they're wrong, it makes them think also. Might not change their mind, but it makes them question. And maybe one of the group that was saying those negative things questions enough to not keep believing it.
Well, I was fortunate. I did not buy into it. And being the rebel-rouser I am, I kind of turned it around and used it as an opportunity to get engaged and to challenge the things that were going on around me, both as a young person and as an adult. But I don't know how. You would think after all these years that we would be better. We would be better. And I hate to be on such a downer. So I'm going to ask you one more question. Give us some hope. If you got to define hope, what is that?
Or okay, let's do it. Can we ask more? How would you do success?
Well,
how would you measure success?
I think simple, the fact that Adam and I are sitting here today.
Okay.
The fact that the entire community this is a topic not only of conversation, but I'm in rooms where business leaders are not only talking about it, but talking about doing something about it in their sphere of influence. Jacksonville is growing about 90 people a day. These individuals are coming from parts of the country that they are probably a little bit more open-minded. And so our community is being infused with people that think differently. I grew up in the South, but I will tell you that Jacksonville is changing. I think the hope is that there are more good people wanting to do the right thing than there are bad people. And the more we start to add to our group and stand up, really stand up, not just talk about it.
Yeah.
really stand up and do something about it, that's what starts to change it. You're always gonna. I've lived, like I said, I've been black all my life, so racism is not something new to me. But you don't have to accept it, and you can do something about it. And we just need more people. And there are good people, but they stay quiet. How do we get their voice illuminated about why they believe it's wrong?
We sort of touched on this a little earlier, and I want to go back to it. And one of the things that has changed over the years, as you know, is communication. We didn't have a social media 20 years ago. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have TikTok. We didn't have Twitter, X. We haven't had any of these things 20, 25 years ago. Now we do, and it's an open forum. And I have to say, we're guilty of it. We didn't have podcasts 10 years ago, and here, we're now participating in part of that whole genre of podcasts.
There are two people here, two of the two mics. 5 weeks ago, we didn't know what podcast was. So, let's get to the bottom line. We're on a learning curve here, guys and ladies.
All of us are. All of us are. But
at least I knew how to spell podcast. We're still working on Tolbert.
First of all, I guess the obvious question is it influencing this problem in general? Is social media influencing it? And if it is, as I'm seeing Eric's head going up and down quite actively, then what can not just podcast, but what can social media do to reverse it, if anything?
That is
welcome to the First Amendment, ladies and gentlemen.
That's $1 million question. I think that the access that our young people have to information is amazing. I can't imagine. You've got as much information you don't have to read anything. You just Google whatever.
Yeah.
And then you see people are allowed to get on a platform and do and say anything. And the problem is people don't think for themselves and they believe it. And our leaders, I hate to say this is not a political statement, our leaders have figured out they can say or do anything and get votes. And nobody's thinking about, is it right or is it wrong? It's about what gets attention, what gets clicks, and then they turn it into this false truth. And so, my daughter's 31, so she's not younger, but she's youngish, and it's really, I would say access to information and people being able to discern what's right and what's wrong. That's part of the issue. Is just because you see it on what looks like a legitimate platform doesn't mean that it's true. You have to be willing to go a little bit deeper, and that's the issue. No one has the patience to figure out if it's right or wrong.
Well, I will tell you from a personal perspective, just thank you, Eric, and both of you guys for stepping up in your organizations. Mike, go ahead.
I was just going to say that let's talk about the gorilla in the room for a minute. Florida's governor's policies and some of his statements, many people believe encourages intolerance. And I see heads going up and down when he says some of these outlandish things and tries to make some of these outlandish things happen. How does that impact? How do those kind of things, and you kind of just referred to it, Eric, but how do those things impact on what you're trying to accomplish?
I just try to our team, our organization, we just try to do what's good and what's right. And we'll continue to do that as our mission as an organization. And so I'll leave the politics to those who play in that ground. But we need all of our leaders.
Well, I'm not talking, it's not politics. I mean, it's not just politics. It's actions.
It is actions.
It spurs action.
What I mean by politics, both sides, and I don't really want to get into this, but both sides, sometimes it's about what gets attention. and that comes back to us. Somebody's voting for everyone, and so what gets attention, sometimes it's just not factual. But that's facts doesn't seem to matter as much these days.
It does. Guys, would you please give out your contact information and how people can find out much more about Together Against Hate and hopefully support it?
Oh no, I think it's more than I think we encourage people. I don't think we hope we do it. I think we've got to find a way to do it. I want to come back to that.
Okay.
Because of the people who helped us on a couple other initiatives. Let's get their information out.
Yeah.
Let me come back to it.
Sure.
So certainly on both the JCA's website and on the First Coast YMCA's website, you can find information on Together Against Hate and the series of programs. I know the next one is October 10th, where we'll be focusing on the issues in the LGBTQ-ish community. And then there'll be programs each of the subsequent months leading up to the 5K run that Eric referred to earlier.
That's in February.
That's in February.
Yeah.
February 25th, I believe, is the Race Against Hate 5K run walk. That will happen then, where we hope to have thousands of people downtown expressing their views in a positive way by participating in it.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
I'm belaboring this, but going back to the folks who are helping your organization, there's some incredible folks who are doing so much every day. My suggestion, it's my observation. I think they want to help. They're probably looking for a way to do that. My just initial gut says I think we've got to put together a program, call it a campaign, call it what you want, that says this is what we're going to do. I think you'll find that they'll volunteer and they'll give you the resources. But I think what they need is a plan of action. These are people like yourselves who are very successful CEOs. They're probably looking to you all to tell us what to do. My personal suggestion is step back, bring in some people who basically, quote, run campaigns, lay out a strategy with some tactics, turn to those people who do it, and then call upon the folks who are supporting you. I go back to what we did with the HRO. People didn't think we could pull it off, but there was a groundswell. I mean, when people realized that we were, the first one of 100 biggest cities in America that didn't have an HRO policy. I mean, they were appalled when they found out. It's about information and it's about education. I don't think we can't live with the alternative. And I'll leave it. You guys are, but whatever we can do, we want to help.
I'll tell you one thing as a practical suggestion. I was part of this when I was working in City Hall. I would like to see us bring back the study circles. The study circles were extremely popular, and I think they did a lot of good. We attracted more than 3,000 people to attend those study circles, and that was run by the Human Rights Commission, as a matter of fact. And in fact, Mayor Deegan's nominee for the DEI officer might be a very good candidate if he ends up working in the HRO, as they're talking about, in heading that and spearheading that and bringing the study circles back. And we can expand on that, because at that time we were doing it and it was just based on race. We could do study circles not only on race, but we could do it on religion. And I'm saying religious discrimination, because it's just not the Jews. I mean, the Muslims have had a very tough time. Who can ever forget the city councilman who asked an appointee if he would pray to God so they could hear whether or not he was praying to a Muslim God or a Christian God? That was Councilman Don Redmond, by the way, back years ago. And I'm sorry, but it's on the record, so that's why I pointed out his name. And plus, I was embarrassed along with everybody else who worked at City Hall because of that question. But we could do it in that way. We could bring in the LGBTQ community and make that part of the study circles. I just think that could be a community-wide project to bring that back. And it was just small groups, 10 to 12 people in a group. And they had them all over the city and had all kinds of people that showed up for that on all sides of the political issues and all the issues that we talked about. But I think that's one practical suggestion that we could see if it might work again.
Yeah. Adam, and you all have probably thought about this, but, one of the folks who unfortunately has now moved to California, Jay Stein and his family, were one of the major underwriters and creators of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. My understanding, having been there a couple of times, we've got the Comer, we've got Mosh. I'm appalled that people still have, I'll try to clean this up, that are that stupid, that think it never happened. It means they've never read a book. I mean, you just can't talk about. Again, these are probably tactics of an overall strategy, but I got to believe that Jay would help us, or the people from the JCA who have incredible relationships with the Holocaust Museum, for them to do a joint partnership with Mosh and with the Comer and make it part of our school system. All they can do is say no. Just a thought.
So there has been the Jacksonville library, the downtown branch. There's been a display up and educational program about the Holocaust that's been going on now for a couple of weeks. And here in town, JFCS, Jewish Family and Community Services, the LGD JFCS, they go into, I don't want to say every school, but a large amount of the schools, right. And they work with many of the Holocaust survivors that do live in there, because the number keeps dwindling because of the age, and some of them are passing on. But there's a fair amount of Holocaust survivors approaching. There's a little under 100 Holocaust survivors that are here in this area, and they work with those who feel comfortable speaking and going into the schools. And so they already do have a program, and so that's a resource that's there that we want all schools to take advantage of, but that resource is there.
Gentlemen, once again, thank you so very much for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll continue following your efforts, and hopefully they will be successful. We're going to, in a way, stay a little bit on this same issue, but we're going to go back into history a little bit. Tim Gilmore is going to be our guest next week. He's a local author, college professor, and we're going to discuss his new book, The Culture Wars of Warren Folks. And Mike Tolbert, I know you're very aware of this. Can you give us and fill in a little bit of information for people who don't know Tim or don't know about Warren Folks?
Well, it's hard I'm going to let Tim tell you about Warren Folks. I could tell you a lot about Warren Folks. In fact, I just started reading Tim's book, and I find my name in there a couple of times. So I knew Warren.
Is that why we're doing the show next week?
Yeah. But what I'd rather do is right now is tell these two fellows how much we appreciate them being with us today. But beyond that, and how much we appreciate what you're doing with this particular effort, beyond that is what you do every day in your jobs to help people, to make people better and to make Jacksonville better. And I think that's important. And I know you live it and you exercise it daily. And we appreciate that you do that.
Yeah, honestly, thank you all both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's going to wrap up another episode of Mike's on Mike. And once again, we want to pay special tribute and thank our friends over at the Jacksonville Historical Society, Alan Bliss, and the donors who have made this show possible. Thank you all very, very much. If you see Alan on the street, because he was there, by the way, the other night at the Jewish Family and Community Services, got to see him there. But do thank him. If you're enjoying our programs, then please look for us on Facebook, our own website, and any place where you get your favorite podcasts. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you all.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and Mike Miller can be found at your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook and YouTube. Learn more at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversations with Mike's on Mike.